the fight against ignorance,
l'amour du savoir
our
et
love
de l'histoire,
for knowledge and history,
et la volonté
and
de ne rien
our
céder
desire
à ceux qui entendent effacer le passé
to not give any
au
ground
motif
to those
qu'il ne correspond pas à l'idée
who would
de ce
remove
qu'on
history simply because it does not match their vision of the present. No,
Napoléon Bonaparte
Napoleon
est part de nous.
Bonaparte is part of all of us.
Il l'est parce que dire son nom
He's
continue
part
de
of all
faire
of us
vibrer
because
partout
just
les
saying
cordes
the
d'imaginaire.
name excites
Les
people.
canonnades de la campagne d'Italie,
The cannonades
l'entrechoquement
of
des sabres
the
d'Austerlitz,
Italian campaign, the
les
Battle of
suppliques
Austerlitz,
grelottants des soldats de la Grande Armée engagés
the
dans la
great
campagne de
army
Russie.
engaged in the campaign in Russia.
Napoléon Bonaparte
Napoleon
est une part de
Bonaparte
nous.
is part of all of us.
Parce que l'action
And that is because
et les leçons
action
du guerrier, du stratège,
and the
du
lessons learned
législateur
from
autant
him
que du
as a
bâtisseur
legislator, as a
portent
fighter, as a
encore
strategist,
sur notre société.
still today echo.
Il l'est, car à mesure que son mythe
He's part of
s'est
us
construit,
because as the myth of the
il
man
devint cette
emerged,
part de France qui a conquis
he
le monde.
became that part of France that conquered the world.
Chateaubriand, dont vous avez rappelé
Chateaubriand,
l'un et
you
l'autre,
mentioned him earlier. In fact,
La
both of our
relation
previous
tumultueuse
speakers mentioned him, had
l'empereur.
a difficult
a
relationship with the
saisi en
emperor.
quelque sorte dans ces termes qui
And
résonnent
in many
encore aujourd'hui
ways,
ce paradoxe.
in the way he expressed
Vivant,
it,
il a manqué le monde,
in a way that's still
mort,
relevant today,
il le
he
possède.
passed the world by alive, but he owns it once
Vous
dead.
êtes lycéen, lycéenne.
We have
Et
here
l'institution même
high
du
schoolers
lycée,
and the institution of high
la
school
forme,
in France, the
l'université.
lycée,
Nous connaissons parfois la grande école que vous rejoindrez dans les mois ou les années à venir.
higher education institutions such as the Grande École that you may be joining in a few months. We owe part of them
Et pour
to
venir
Napoleon.
ici, à l'Institut de France, vous
And
avez
here
traversé
today at the
Paris.
Institut de
Et
France,
sans doute êtes-vous
to be with us,
passé
you
devant l'Arc de
travelled
Triomphe,
across Paris. You
l'église de
maybe saw the
la
Arc de
colonne
Triomphe,
Vendôme, peut-être
La
encore
Madeleine,
traversé
Vendôme.
le pont d'Austerlitz,
You maybe
l'Iéna,
even
parcouru
crossed
la
the
rue de
Iéna
Rivoli.
or Austerlitz
Ces chefs-d'œuvre
bridges, the
d'architecture et d'urbanisme
Rivoli area. All of these
nous les
great
devons
areas and architectural marvels we owe to Napoleon as well.
vivants.
They're still here, they're still alive.
Il faut le dire. Ont façonné
And
autant
very
de
few destinies,
au-delà de la
it deserves to be said, have shaped history in quite this way.
C'est ce qui fait que nous sommes rassemblés ce jour.
And that is why we are together
Non pas pour
here
nous
this
livrer
afternoon.
à une célébration exaltée,
We're not here to
comme le fit en 1840
celebrate in only
le peuple de
positive
Paris au
terms
reconnaissance de l'empereur.
his life as the people of Paris did when his ashes were returned to Paris, but to look back in an enlightened way, with our eyes open, to look back at our history as a
Dire
whole,
comme nation ce que Napoléon dit
to
de
say
nous,
as a nation what Napoleon says about us and what we made of him.
Napoléon en 1802
In
vous l'avez là
1802,
aussi évoqué,
Napoleon, and you mentioned this as
a
well,
rétabli l'esclavage que la Convention
Napoleon
de 1794
re-established
avait aboli.
slavery
En
that the Convention of
1848, avec
1794 had
la Deuxième
abolished.
République a réparé cette
The Second
faute,
Republic
cette trahison.
repaired that betrayal, that mistake
Elle a
of the
honoré
period.
au Panthéon ceux qui, comme Toussaint
In the
Louverture,
Pantheon,
l'abbé Grégoire, portèrent alors le
Abbot
flambeau
Grégoire
universel.
took up the universal flag.
Napoléon, dans ses conquêtes,
Napoleon, through his
ne s'est
conquests,
jamais véritablement préoccupé
never
des pertes humaines.
truly worried about human losses.
Chateaubriand ira jusqu'à l'accuser
Chateaubriand, in fact,
sacrifié avec
accused
force
him
une génération,
of
il faut bien le dire.
sacrificing 5 million French people,
Goya, il
although a
organisa
little
le massacre de
exaggerated.
civils
Goya
espagnols en mai 1808.
painted the massacre of civilians in 1808.
Et depuis lors, placer la
Since
valeur
then,
de la vie humaine
we have placed the value of human life higher than anything
soit dans les
else
guerres,
in time of war and of pandemic.
Napoléon, ainsi fidèle à l'esprit de 1789, a gravé dans le
Napoleon
marbre l'égalité civile
wrote
entre
in
les
stone
hommes dans
civil
le code
equality
civil,
between
la
men
protection
in the
de
French
la
civil
loi
code,
avec le code pénal.
the guarantee of law for all with the Code Pénal, the criminal code. We followed in the footsteps of that progress by fighting for equality between men and women and by removing from that same criminal code the most cruel of punishments, capital punishment.
Comme nous avons aussi élargi le chemin de mérite
We also
tracé avec le baccalauréat,
broadened what was possible through the baccalaureate and grew our education system and made it accessible to as many people as possible. At the end of the day,
renoncer au pire,
we gave up the worst of the empire and we took the best of the emperor.
commémorer ce bicentenaire.
Let us commemorate this 200th anniversary. And in commemorating it, we say these things open-mindedly and clear-headedly, without anachronism and judging the past by the rules of the present, but by looking back at who we are, the French people. We are a historical society, a country for the ages that moves forward without denying, but by reinterpreting and recognizing and looking for understanding. A nation that bears legacies as a free people. From Clovis to the committee, I bear responsibility for everything, he said. And today, we bear responsibility for everything still. But the life and works of Napoleon are more than just what we turned them into as a nation. Through its scope, through its borders, and through its lasting legacy, we see that by upsetting the universal, his life has something of an intimate echo in all of our lives, ancient virtues and modern paradoxes. The life of Napoleon is first and foremost an ode to political willpower. People may think that destinies are written in stone before their time, but a young child from Ajaccio who became the man of the world shows that a single man, can change the course of history. His military victories, his energy, his tactical choices in Wagram, Austerlitz, his presence in the past and in the present have been changed. Imagine succeeding in Russia or Vienna. The destiny of France would not have been the same without these events. We love Napoleon because his life shows what is possible, because his life invites us to take risks, invites us to trust our imagination and to fully be ourselves. The life of Napoleon goes beyond this. It's also related to reasoning, and he is probably one of the people who went the furthest in the Enlightenment. The art of organization, of thinking, all of that legacy from the 18th century. In the St. Helena Memorial, he is described as being exceptional in mathematics, arithmetics. He spent days and nights reading books on military strategy. Gaspard Gourgaud was another person exiled with him, and he said of the emperor that he was similar to Spinoza. But beyond his personal growth, Napoleon wanted that reasoning, science, that technical understanding put France on the path to progress. That is why he reformed the Polytechnique school, which today still gives France its top engineers. Saint-Cyr, the officer training academy in France, still trains genius military officers. Napoleon also, every time, sought to contribute to pushing forward scientific knowledge and research. The Egypt campaign is one example of this. More so than a military campaign, this was a scientific expedition. From the Institut, that he followed closely, he won over more than 150 scientists, doctors, botanists, architects, mathematicians, some of the greatest minds of his time, and brought them together in an Academy of Sciences to study the world flora, fauna, and everything about Egypt. They did it together and brought back a body of knowledge that is commended by all. His life is the epiphany of freedom, despite all of its paradoxes, and despite all of what you mentioned of his relationship to the freedom of others. But Napoleon may be the first romantic, and that's not just because he inspired Goethe, because he inspired Stendhal. Victor Hugo lacked words to celebrate him. He was described in many ways. in a way that sometimes rectifies history, as you explained, but not for these reasons, but because in every aspect of his life, he would reinvent his own existence. He was infinitely free, a force of nature. He would always follow his heart, even to divorce after being crowned by the Pope and leading the Concordat. He had great mastery of strategy, but also of surprise warfare and movement by breaking away from traditional tactics, and that is what led to his success. He had that 100-day panache, and he had weaknesses. He had the melancholia of Saint Helena. He had all of these contradictions within him. He was an enlightened despot. Napoleon, as it was written, was capable of all of the greatest, of being modest, of succeeding in his dreams, and also falling from high pedestals. He was both an ogre and an eagle. He represented his time, but also police repression. He could indeed be the soul of the world, as Hegel wrote in Iéna, and also the demon of Europe in the same man. That is the dark side of unlimited freedom. Napoleon represents in the building of this nation something universal, a universal legacy. From where I stand, Napoleon is the man who gave existence to our organization, our administration. He gave shape to the early sovereignty as it emerged from the French Revolution. And here, once again, we are not here to judge the way he accessed power with the Orangerie and the 18th of Brumaire. We're not here to say whether Napoleon was a proponent or an opponent of the revolution values. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert, especially in this house, but also this is a debate that divided historians from the moment he passed and continues to today. The fact is that after months of failures, of difficult fronts, Napoleon was able to be order incarnate. After months of uncertainty and hesitance, Napoleon was able to give sustainable meaning to that revolutionary intuition of sovereignty. How did he do this? Well, Napoleon very quickly understood that it was necessary to fill the void left by the divine right, replacing it by another form of legitimacy, another form of transcendency. And to him, that was the French people. Everything done without the people is illegitimate. And behind the French people, as the new bearers of national sovereignty, as the bearers of this transcendency, of course, they didn't have the democratic freedom, but we did see the shape of the state. State through mayors and prefects, who would soon be deployed throughout the country and enable the country to stay united, and the great institutions of France that were set up at that time. Napoleon also understood that he needed to tirelessly seek unity and grandeur for the country. He did this through war, by finding shared enemies for France, such as England, and also the French people were thirsty for universality, and he sought that at European scale. He did this by calming relations with the big religions through the Concordat. He did it through warfare, and he also did it by reconciling those who had been torn apart in the bloody revolution. Through the principles of equality, Napoleon was the architect of the armistice of some part of the royalists. That same unity was visible in his government. At the end of the day, he brought together the country in the concrete way around the symbols used when he was crowned. The hand of justice, the Merovingian relics, the necklace of the Légion d'honneur.
Car son ultime intuition
because his ultimate intuition
le vide laissé par
was
la
to
figure
fill
du
the
roi le 21
void
janvier.
left by the king on the
La
21st
solution
of
de
January.
celui qui devint en 1802 consul
In
à titre
1802, he
radical,
would become a lifetime consul,
confier dans un
and his
Occident
vision was radical
extraordinaire la République à un
to
empire,
reconcile republic and empire
des Français.
by becoming the emperor of the
Ambition
French people.
personnelle, assurément.
A personal
Façon de
ambition
prévenir toute
that
tentation de retour à
he
l'état antérieur
hoped would
et
prevent any
d'ancrer
fall
la
back
révolution
to the
dans la
previous
durée.
state and hoped would make the revolution sustainable.
Les Français en 1789
In 1789, the French people, as Tocqueville wrote, made the greatest effort that any people has ever made. They split their destiny in two. They put a gulf between them, between what they were and what they wanted to be. The genius of Napoleon was to help the French people to break away permanently, definitively, from what they decided to leave behind them in 1789 and to cross that gulf. He could not, however, anchor the revolution and also prevent the French people from seeking the freedom that they so desired. 1789, in that, is stronger than Napoleon. You are high schoolers. You are French people. And you are part of this history. You are not responsible, nor are you wardens of this history. You can love it and you can criticize it, so long as you learn it, so long as you know it. But history is here. It's part of what builds us. It's important to take on this new century. It's part of you, and you must continue this history. Napoleon's works, overall, in all of their contrast with their light and their dark sides, have yet to be fully understood. But it continues to shape us. And the sun of Austerlitz still shines bright. Long live the Republic, and long live France.